The first time it happened, Thomas figured it was just stress. He'd been working late nights at the architectural firm, surviving on gas station coffee and 4 hours of restless sleep. So when he woke at 3:07 a.m., chest heavy, unable to move a single muscle, he told himself it was just his body protesting. His eyes, though those still worked. The dim orange glow from the street lamps seeped through the blinds, striping the bedroom in broken light. And that's when he saw them, figures, 3 of them, standing in a half circle around the foot of his bed. They weren't solid. The light seemed to pass through them like mist, but the outlines were unmistakable, long, narrow bodies, necks stretched a little too high, heads tilted as if studying him. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They just watched. Thomas tried to scream. Not a sound came out. His jaw wouldn't open. His lungs refused to obey. Seconds or minutes passed before his vision blurred. He blinked and they were gone. The weight on his chest lifted, and suddenly he could breathe again. He sat up in a rush, heart punching against his ribs, sweat soaking the back of his t-shirt. The room was empty. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. He told himself it was sleep paralysis. He'd read about it, hallucinations, shadow people, all that. It wasn't real. But something about the way they leaned in, just enough for him to feel their attention like heat on his skin, didn't feel like a dream. The next night, he stayed up until nearly 2 a.m., binge watching reruns on his laptop. He figured if he avoided sleep, he'd avoid the paralysis. At some point, though, exhaustion caught him. When he woke again, 3:09, and he couldn't move. This time there were 4 of them. They were closer now, their shapes sharper, like ink spilled in water but refusing to dissolve. The tallest one stood near his knees, its head cocked far to one side, as if trying to understand him. The others flanked it, their bodies trembling in a slow, almost breathing rhythm, and then one of them bent forward. Its face was nothing but darkness, but Thomas swore he saw the faintest suggestion of a grin. A whisper brushed his ear. Not a word, not even a sound he could name, more like the feeling of breath sliding against his skin. Then they were gone, again. The following morning, Thomas sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee he couldn't bring himself to drink. He searched sleep paralysis shadow figures on his phone, scrolling past Reddit threads full of similar stories. They watch me, they're tall, they're always at 3 a.m. Someone claimed they were sleep demons. Another called them visitors. Most people laughed it off. Thomas didn't laugh. That night, he went to bed with the lights on. The 3rd night, he didn't remember falling asleep at all. When his eyes opened, 3:11 a.m. paralysis was instant. 5 of them now, 1 on each side of the bed, 1 by his head. They were so close he could see the faint ripple of their outlines like heat waves over asphalt. The tallest one leaned in until its shadow face hovered inches above his own. For the first time, it moved slowly, mimicking the way his chest rose and fell. Practicing, rehearsing. Thomas tried to turn away. Couldn't. He felt something, an invisible hand press lightly on his cheek, fingers far too long, brushing down to his throat. Not squeezing. Not yet. The grin, or what he thought was a grin, widened. Then, as before, they were gone. In the morning, Thomas called in sick. He told his boss it was the flu. He didn't mention the figures. He didn't mention that every time he closed his eyes, even for a second, he saw them waiting in the dark. But that evening, as he walked home from the corner store, something made him stop cold. Across the street, half hidden in the shadow between 2 buildings, stood a tall, thin silhouette, perfectly still. Watching him, Thomas blinked, heart hammering. When he looked again, it was gone. And for the first time, the sun was still up. Thomas told himself it was just a trick of the light. That figure in the alley could have been a lamppost, a shadow from a moving car, anything. His mind was wound too tight from lack of sleep. But as he stood in the kitchen that night, eating cold Chinese takeout, he kept glancing at the window. His apartment was on the 3rd floor, too high for anyone to be outside. Still, he closed the blinds. He wasn't hungry anymore. He tried sleeping on the couch, thinking maybe a change of setting would help. He kept the TV on, volume low, just to have some noise. At 2:58 a.m., he was still awake, watching some late-night infomercial about knives that could cut through coins. And then the screen flickered. Not off, not static, just a quick pulse of darkness, like someone had blinked over the picture. When it came back, Thomas froze. The salesman was still talking, but in the reflection of the TV screen, he could see his living room and something else. 3 tall, narrow shadows stood behind the couch. Right behind him. He whipped around. Nothing. No sound except the faint hum of the TV. He didn't even realize his hands were shaking until he tried to pick up the remote and nearly dropped it. This is not real, he told himself. It's sleep deprivation. Hallucinations happen. But the hollow feeling in his stomach told him otherwise. The next day at work, his coworker Jenna frowned at him across their shared cubicle wall. "Tom, you look like hell. You sick?" "Didn't sleep," he said. "Again? Man, that's like 3 days straight. You need to see somebody." He almost laughed. "Yeah, sure. I'll tell a doctor about the faceless stalkers in my bedroom." But all he said was, "Yeah, maybe." That night, he fell asleep without meaning to. When his eyes opened, 3:06 a.m., he was in bed again, flat on his back. Couldn't move. They were there. Not 3, not 4-7 now. The tallest stood by his head, and this time it leaned down so far its neck bent at an impossible angle, its head upside down above his face. There was no mouth, no eyes, but somehow he knew it was looking into him. Another stood at the side of the bed and moved its head, exactly like his, perfectly in sync. When he blinked, it blinked. When his chest rose, it rose. The others were shifting slightly, tilting their heads in strange, bird-like jerks, studying every twitch of his eyelids, every shallow breath. They weren't just watching anymore. They were learning. When he woke fully, he was drenched in sweat, his heart slamming so hard it hurt. He sat up, breathing like he'd just run a mile, and that's when he heard it. A knock. Not from the door, from inside his apartment. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the bedroom wall, coming from the side where his bed was pushed up against it. He lived alone. He didn't go back to sleep that night. He sat in the living room with all the lights on until the sky turned gray. By 8 a.m. his hands wouldn't stop trembling. He called his sister, Emily, in Denver. "You sound awful," she said. "What's going on?" "Have you ever had sleep paralysis?" he asked. She hesitated. "No, why?" He considered telling her everything, the tall figures, the way they kept multiplying, but decided against it. "Never mind, I'm just not sleeping well." "You should get out of that apartment for a while," she suggested. "Come stay with me." "Seriously, Tom, you sound bad." "I'll think about it," he said. But he didn't think about it. He knew it wouldn't help. They'd already followed him once when he was awake. That evening, he was walking home from the grocery store when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him swipe. A voice, barely a whisper, came through. "We see you." Thomas froze on the sidewalk, staring at the phone. "Who is this?" he demanded. Silence. Then, so faint he almost thought he imagined it. "Turn around." He did. Halfway down the block, under a streetlight, stood a tall, thin silhouette. Watching him, that night, he didn't even make it to bed. He sat on the couch with a kitchen knife in his lap, staring at the door. At exactly 3 a.m., every light in his apartment went out. The silence was so complete he could hear his own heartbeat. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, coming from the hallway. They stopped just outside the living room. Thomas gripped the knife until his knuckles hurt. A voice not from outside, but inside his skull spoke without sound. "We're almost ready." Thomas didn't remember falling asleep. One moment, he was sitting on the couch in darkness, gripping the knife. The next, his eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, and his body wouldn't move. The paralysis was back. He wasn't in bed, he was still on the couch, but they had found him anyway. 8 of them now. They were spread around the room like sentinels, their towering forms bending forward in unnatural curves, necks craning as if to study him from every angle. The tallest one crouched in front of the couch, bringing its face to within inches of his. No features, no eyes, no mouth. Just an endless black void where a face should be. And then it spoke, not aloud, not with sound, but in a thought that wasn't his own, almost. One of the others tilted its head, the motion jerky and mechanical. Then it copied him exactly, every shallow breath, every micro blink. It was like watching a video of himself in real time, but twisted, stretched, wrong. Another shadow reached toward his leg. Its fingers were impossibly long, spindly, jointed too many times, and when they touched him, the cold sank deep into his bones, an unnatural frost that felt alive. The instant the cold touched him, the mimic shadow shifted again, this time, taking on a shape, his shape. It didn't just copy his breathing anymore, it was him. He was staring at a dark, featureless version of himself, the same height, same build, same faint scar on the chin from a bike accident when he was 12. It bent down until their heads were level, and somehow, without a face, he knew it was smiling. When the paralysis finally released him, Thomas bolted off the couch so fast he nearly tripped. The knife clattered to the floor. He backed into the farthest corner of the room, panting, every light in the apartment blazing. It was 4:12 a.m. he didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, his phone rang. It was Emily again. "Tom, I'm worried about you. I called your work. They said you haven't shown up in 2 days. I'm fine," he lied. "You don't sound fine. I just need rest." A long pause. Then her voice dropped. "You sound different." Thomas frowned. "What do you mean?" "Like your voice is yours, but it's not. Like someone trying to be you." Her words sent a cold spike down his spine. He didn't answer. "Tom," she said, "I have to go." He hung up. That evening, he heard a knock at his door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. His heart leapt into his throat. He approached the peephole cautiously. Emily was standing there. "Tom, it's me." "Open up." Relief washed over him until she smiled. It wasn't Emily's smile. It was wrong. Too wide, too still. She didn't blink. "Tom," she said again. Her voice was almost perfect, but the tone was flat, empty. "I'm worried about you." Every instinct in him screamed, "Don't open it." She tilted her head, the movement sharp and unnatural. "We just want to see you." Then her face melted. Not literally, but the shape of it shifted, blurred, as if it were made of smoke, trying to remember what a human looked like. Thomas staggered back. The knocking started again, this time on every wall of his apartment. He grabbed his coat, his keys, and ran. The stairwell was dark. Too dark. The light above him flickered once, and then went out completely. He heard them in the shadows, not footsteps, not breathing. Just the sound of something moving where it shouldn't be able to move. He sprinted down the stairs 2 at a time, burst out the front door, and didn't stop until he was halfway across town. He found himself at an all-night diner, slumped in a booth with a mug of coffee he wasn't drinking. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, noticed his shaking hands. "You okay, hun?" she asked. He almost told her everything. Almost. But then, as she leaned in, her expression froze. Her neck turned not naturally, but in a slow, deliberate rotation that went too far, bending at an angle that would have snapped a real person's spine. Thomas's blood ran cold. The grin spread across her face. "They're here too." He left cash on the table and walked out without a word. It didn't matter anymore where he went. They could be anyone. He didn't realize until he got home that his apartment door was already unlocked. Inside, the lights were off, and someone was sitting on his couch. When his eyes adjusted, he saw that it was him. Exactly him. Same clothes, same hair, same faint stubble on the jaw. The other Thomas stood up, moved exactly as he would, and spoke in his voice perfectly. Almost ready. The other Thomas smiled. It was subtle, but Thomas could feel it more than he could see it, like the grin was inside his skull. Stretching his thoughts in ways that weren't his own, he backed away until his shoulder hit the doorframe. "What do you want?" The copy tilted its head, the movement sharp, unnatural. "We want to be." Its voice was perfect. Not close, not almost, but perfect. One shadow broke away and pressed itself against the far wall. Its form rippled, smoothed, and began changing. A human outline took shape beneath the darkness. It grew arms, legs, the slope of a jaw. Then features emerged faint, blurred at first, then sharpening. It was Emily. The real Emily? No, her eyes were wrong. The smile was too still. The air grew colder. Thomas's breath came out in a pale mist. The other Thomas stepped closer, now only a foot away. "We've been watching for a long time. Not just you, all of you." He felt the words in his head as much as he heard them. "When we know you well enough," it continued, "we step in. And you step out." The shadows began to circle, their long limbs brushing the walls, the ceiling. The room felt smaller, like the space itself was collapsing in. Thomas lunged for the door. It slammed shut before he reached it. Something cold wrapped around his ankle. He looked down. One of them had hold of him, its fingers tightening. Another grabbed his wrist, the icy grip burning into his skin. He fought, kicking, twisting, but they were impossibly strong. They dragged him backward toward the couch. The other Thomas stepped aside, letting them pull him down. Pinned against the cushions, Thomas couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The other leaned over him. "It's easier if you don't fight." Then the shadows pressed closer and closer, until the room was gone, replaced by a black so deep it felt endless. He was falling through it, weightless, surrounded by shapes that moved like people but weren't. Somewhere far away, he heard his own voice calling for help. But it wasn't coming from him. When the blackness thinned, Thomas was standing in his living room, only something was off. The walls felt slightly too far apart, air too still. Outside the window, the city was there, but muted, the colors drained. And sitting on the couch was him, the other Thomas, living, breathing, laughing into a phone. Thomas banged on the window, shouted, but the sound went nowhere. The other didn't look at him, didn't even seem to hear him. Then Emily walked in, smiling. She hugged the other Thomas. They talked, they laughed. Life went on without him. A shadow stood beside him now, taller than the rest, its faceless head tilting in satisfaction. "You watch now," it whispered into his mind. And that's when Thomas understood. This was what they did. They watched you until they could take your place. And when they were ready, you became one of them. He looked down at his own arms. They were fading, fingers stretching longer, skin turning the same inky black as the ones who had watched him. The others moved in around him, welcoming him without touch. And for the first time, Thomas felt the pull not to escape, but to learn. Somewhere, someone was sleeping, and he was going to watch. 3:07, a man wakes in his bed, chest heavy, unable to move. Through the shadows, something tall leans closer, studying him, practicing, waiting, almost ready.